Hi, Dr. Phillip. Thank you so much for joining us today for Mind Matters. Now let's get straight to this first article we found, and it's all on the stigma of mental illness, and specifically the stigma of mental illness in a parent may have an impact on their parenting style and in turn the development of their children. So we've spoken about the stigma of mental illness before. How do you think stigma can affect a parent who has a mental health issue to actually parent properly?
Yeah, well, when parents suffer a mental illness, there are many factors that can influence their role as a parent. One of this can be the stigma associated with the illness. Of course, other factors can be genetics or learned behavior. And of course, the impact of poorly managed and controlled mental health symptoms can have an impact on parenting, of course, as well. Of course, the mental illness of a spouse can lead to marital problems in some instances, and that can also have an impact on parenting as well. But looking at stigma alone, this includes prejudice and stereotype, which can lead to very often isolation, shame, and distancing. Societal responses like, lack of vocational and educational opportunities, people don't get jobs so easily. These can significantly impact the individual and then the children under their care. Of course, stigma is across the board, and sometimes it can be lack of funding, lack of services, and research in mental health, which we often see in developing countries like ours. And due to this, it can also have an indirect effect on the ability of a parent with mental illness to effectively parent.
So are you saying that most parents with mental illness or mental health issues cannot parent?
No, not necessarily. I don't think that's, it's not A plus B is equal to C sort of thing. Parents and caregivers are critical figures in a child's development, but there are many other factors that are involved in the development of mental health problems. But we do know that family-related early experiences have a profound and maybe long-lasting effect on children. In fact, studies have shown that experiencing parental separation, discord, or loss of a parent, or living with a mentally ill carer, risks, of mental health problems in lifespan. One study shows that 56% of people who experienced parental divorce in childhood develop depression in adulthood, compared to those who didn't have the same experience. But there's still that 44% who didn't develop it. So there are other factors in play, including genetics, temperament, resilience, vulnerability. Also, it may not just be the divorce or the loss at that moment. It could also be the resulting financial difficulties, the shame, the changes in social networks, or the accommodation that they now need to get used to. So in the end, parenting is one of the many factors, and it's like a big jigsaw puzzle, and these factors need to come together to create the full picture, I guess.
I think in this article, it sort of touches more on the stigma, as in, like, when someone has mental illness, the entire family will say, oh, she is not fit or he is not fit to be a parent, and they will take the child away because of that stigma, even though it's, like you said, a combination of all sorts of criteria for a parent to parent properly and to have mental health issues, right? Because parents have been typically blamed for their children's mental health issues. If a child has a mental health issue, the parent is to blame. And when it comes to stigma for a child's mental health issues, or to get treatment for a child, the stigma is there that says that, oh, I am to blame. I'm not going to bring my child to go see a psychiatrist or a psychologist because they would say that I caused this mental health issue.
Yeah. Well, that's quite sad, because basically the onset of treatment, the better the outcomes are. And I think it's important for parents to know that it's always a combination of factors. It cannot be just one. And those factors, may be out of their control. It could be school, it could be, Facebook, it could be social media, it could be a variety of things, and not just parenting. And so, shed the guilt and the blame and everything else and look for, appropriate help and recovery at an early stage. I think that's the important message.
Okay. All right, let's move on to our next article. And this one is taken from an article from Australia, but because they have a lot of rural areas in Australia where it's like really far out from a functioning town, Yeah. So in this article, it says that rural GPs are urged to look after their patients' mental health as well. So I'm thinking about us here in Malaysia. We have a lot of rural areas as well. Like, are their mental health being taken care of?
Yeah. Well, I think this is basically an opinion piece in the News GP of the Royal Australian College of GPs. And it suggests that the pandemic actually has maybe created more problems for rural people accessing mental health care. I think it's common throughout the world. I think it's not just unique to Australia. I'm sure in Malaysia as well, this can be a problem. But we have a system of general practitioners and primary care doctors and healthcare professionals that are accessible for most people throughout the country, irrespective of rural or urban. The thing is, how competent are they in dealing with mental health issues? And only recently has mental health been emphasized more in undergraduate studies for medical schools. I mean, the last 15, 20 years perhaps. Before that, it was a very short sort of posting. You either did it, didn't do it, it was optional. But now it's mandated that we have mental health as a huge component in the training of new doctors. So the younger doctors are maybe more capable of managing, dealing with this. There is, however, a gap because you train as a doctor, you come out, and then you're doing your apprenticeship, which is housemanship. And that now in Malaysia is 2 years where you put what you've learned into practice. Now, in housemanship, it's not mandated that you do a psychiatry posting. And this can be a gap where, people may lose the skills and the, whatever they learned in undergraduate to be able to create that when they come out. But we have been involved. I mean, a lot of psychiatrists have been involved in training general practitioners, primary care doctors. We've conducted CPDs, and I still do them myself. I recently conducted 2 webinars for general practitioners in dealing with mental health through the COVID period as well. The unique sort of mental health problems that they may, encounter in their practice. So I think it's important that, maybe doctors themselves empower themselves with the knowledge and understanding of mental health.
But can these rural doctors, like even healthcare is hard to come by, can these rural doctors or GPs properly diagnose and treat mental illness?
See, we divide psychiatric disorders into 2 major groups, the high prevalent and the low prevalent psychiatric disorders. The high prevalent disorders are the ones that occurs in 10 to 15% of the population. I mean, I'm talking about anxiety disorders. They're more common than diabetes and hypertension. They are primary care problems. They're not specialist problems. I mean, we have about 400, 450 psychiatrists. Are we going to deal with 15% of the population? So they really need to be managed in primary care and in general practice. And so the sad thing is, for a long time, it hasn't been actually acknowledged or treated appropriately. But now I think a lot of healthcare professionals are stepping up to help in dealing with the more common illnesses, the high prevalent disorders. Now, illnesses that are serious and complex like schizophrenia, bipolar, that may be a bit too hard to deal with in primary care or in a general practice setting. And only maybe the stable patients who just need reviews are the ones that can be managed in that sort of setting. But otherwise, they would maybe require more specialist care. So it's the large proportion that actually can be managed in a rural setting or any setting by general doctors as well.
Okay. So how can we actually ensure that the mental health of the rural folks are taken care of should we send more young doctors into the rural areas who have, this a psychological background, psychology background?
Yeah, well, I mean, the training in psychiatry and mental health has been there for some time now in medical school. So I would say that most doctors in rural areas are already equipped. It's basically maybe developing their skills and empowering their skills more. And so, maybe having more CMEs, continued medical education, developing professional education in relation to mental health. I think these are areas that they can focus on to be able to be more, sort of equipped to deal with patients with these problems.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I wanted to say is also we have online tools and services that are available, especially during this period, not just for healthcare workers, but also for general public. And, they can reach out if they have problems, even in the rural areas. So Mercy Malaysia, Malaysian Medical Association, they run psychological helplines, either on social media or even by phone. I am a volunteer for MMA helpline, and but the only thing is, I wish there was more take up. There aren't many people who actually, feel obliged to call or discuss these things, even though it can be anonymous.
Okay, so give these hotlines a try. If you're shy to go to see a doctor about something that you're feeling recently, something that's not right, give these hotlines a try.
Absolutely.
Okay. Next article. It's interesting because it's talks about the roots of mental illness. Like, is there a root cause of mental illness? Is it in the genes? Is it from the brain activities? Is it nature? Is it nurture?
Yeah. Well, actually, it can be either. It can be, combination, or it can be none. Because some mental illnesses arise from no increased genetics or heritability, or no brain disorder, and can be completely psychological or functional. Others can have one or a combination. So take, for example, bipolar disorder. It's not a very common disorder. It may occur in 1 to 2% of the population, but it is quite disabling. And it is thought
Doctor,
to be
can we please maybe explain what bipolar disorder is?
Okay, yep.
Yeah.
So bipolar disorder is a mood disorder where there are highs and there are lows. And the highs are called mania, the lows are called depression. And so it can be quite disabling for the individual with bipolar disorder. But bipolar disorder is thought to be one of the most heritable mental disorders and can have a risk of 50 to 75% among immediate family. I had a family where the mother and her 2 sons all had bipolar disorder. Then there are cases of, for example, winter birds in temperate climates, where they have winter and everything. There is evidence of more schizophrenia occurring in babies born in winter. When they grow to be an adult, the risk of schizophrenia is higher in them compared to babies born in summer, spring, or autumn. Now, that's thought to be linked to a seasonal flu, which is very common in temperate climates, that occurs during summer. And the second trimester of pregnancy is the time when the brain is being developed in the fetus. If that brain development is hindered by a small flu, it can then increase the vulnerability for schizophrenia at a later time. So, so it can be genes, it can be brain activity, but then, you have a trauma in your family, somebody passes away, and you go through grief and then depression. Now, that's not brain or genes. It's psychological, so it can be one, it can be a combination. Very often it's a combination, and that's why our treatment also focuses on a multitude of things.
So basically that means at any point with the right trigger, any of us could actually have some kind of a disorder or a mental health issue.
Yep. No, you're right, JD. So, I mean, we all have vulnerability factors, and I think we need to look back and see where or what they are in our lives. I mean, some can be genetics, some can be experiences in childhood. Some can be organic. They have had a trauma or, substance use problem in the past. All these will lead to being vulnerable. And so, yeah, we all stand at different gradients of vulnerability in our lives.
I mean, with what's going on with this current situation, a lot of people it's increased, and people who just seemed regular, seemed normal, start to develop depressive
And anxiety
conditions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, the CMCO may also prevent people from actually seeking treatment and help. But in my own practice, I'm seeing an increase in people with mental health problems, and also those who are stable before now, re-experiencing symptoms all over again.
Now, doctor, is it easier to treat something that is genetic, that is like inborn, or psychological?
Well, it depends. There are many factors, I think, that can determine that. If it's genetic and it leads to neurochemical changes in the brain, it may be easier to treat. But if it's genetic and it leads to neuroanatomical changes, that means brain changes altogether and not just neurochemical, then that may be a bit harder. So we have different types of schizophrenia as well, type 1, type 2. And in these types, there are brain changes in the type 2, which actually suggests it may be harder to treat.
Okay. But I mean, psychologically, sometimes people's minds is very hard to change as well, right? It's pretty hard to treat.
Yeah. So, I mean, that depends also on your personality traits. So people who already have personality traits that, maybe make them more anxious and avoidant, and then develop an anxiety disorder, it may complicate the outcomes in the treatment.
Okay. Researchers in this article actually said that if you have one disorder, it is more likely that you might develop another. Why is that?
Well, actually, comorbidity is very common. I mean, most people with a mental health disorder also have symptoms of another. In fact, we use the ICD classification, the WHO International Classification of Disorders for Mental Health. That's the official classification in Malaysia. And in the ICD-10, they actually have a condition called mixed anxiety with depression. Now, that's not in DSM, because, I mean, the DSM is the American classification of disorders, because they don't see that very often in America. But we see it in developing countries more. And I see it in my own practice. I see a lot of patients with a mixture of anxiety and depression. And they're both equally significant. So they fit into this category called mixed anxiety with depression. But like most of our patients with depression can have anxiety. It can be vice versa as well. And sometimes it's a chicken and egg story. Someone who, for example, uses drugs may trigger off a depression or anxiety or a psychotic episode. Or it could be that he or she has an underlying illness which they are self-medicating with their drugs or alcohol. So yeah, very often the comorbidity is present.
But you mentioned the Americans don't seem to have this standard. Those in the developing countries do. So is it a geographical thing, or is it a socioeconomical thing?
Well, actually, there are some studies that suggest that cultural, socioeconomic, and geographical may play a role. I mean, the further you're away from mental health services and the less understanding you have of mental health, then your symptoms become more physical. Yeah. So if you're experiencing depression, but you can't express it, you can't say, I feel sad, I feel depressed and down. You may show it in anxiety. Your heart beats faster, you're trembling, you're shaking, you're going to faint, you're going to fall. So yeah, we have a physical expression of our mental health sometimes.
Let's move on to our next article, which actually says that meat eaters tend to have better psychological health than vegetarians, which is interesting because we were told that eating a plant-based diet is much better for our health, but it might not be better for our mental health.
I think this study is a bit controversial. First and foremost, it's not really a study, it's a review. So they looked at 18 studies that were done in the past and then compiled all the data and then, try to make some statistics to identify which, the outcomes were. And in the end, when they came up with the statement, they couldn't justify it. They didn't have explanations. But some of the hypotheses that they came up is it could be cause and effect problems. So, people with depression and anxiety sometimes self-medicate by changing their diets. And they may omit certain things in their food, or they may become more sensitive in their thinking and, not want to see animals being tortured and so omit, meat completely. So, the reason for their change could be actually due to an underlying problem already. The second thing is people who are on a vegetarian diet, of course, need to monitor some of their nutrients, minerals, and vitamins, because just being purely vegetarian sometimes can lead to B12 and vitamin D deficiency, which are closely linked with depression and anxiety. And even fatty omega-3 fatty acids, as well as iron. All of this actually have been shown to be linked to depression and anxiety as well. So yeah, sometimes it can be actually food exclusion rather than resorting to a healthy diet. In impoverished communities and people who may not have the means, they may be restricted in the food options that they have. And so, they have other factors that are leading to their depression and anxiety, not just their new diet.
So are you saying that diet doesn't play that big of a role when it comes to our mental health?
Well, I think it has some influence, but I think there needs to be more research in this. Of course, the direct effect is if we are missing out on nutrients, minerals, and vitamins, which actually can be measured in our blood. But otherwise, if we supplement ourselves and we chose a diet because of health reasons, then it shouldn't be a problem at all.
Yeah. So don't go out there and eat all the meat that you want because you say that this will make you feel healthier in your mind.
Exactly right. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our next article, which is our final one. And this one actually says that children with long-term health conditions may be more likely to experience mental illness in early adolescence than compared to healthy children. This is according to a new research from Queen Mary University of London. So what we want to ask you, doctor, is like, how does a long-term health condition affect a child's mental health?
Well, I don't think there's anything new. I mean, we've seen in chronic medical conditions, the risk of mental health problems is actually on the rise. In fact, we just concluded a survey in a heart institute looking at depression and those who've had a heart event, and found almost 49% of them had symptoms suggestive of depression.
Wow.
Now that's a huge
number.
Yeah. So they are at higher risk. But I mean, generally, chronic illness is defined as illnesses that can't be cured, but perhaps controlled with medication and therapy. So a good example would be the asthmatic child who has mild symptoms, but fairly well controlled. But the study actually suggests they eventually may have higher mental health issues. So the chronic condition can affect, of course, their routine activities, friendships, the activity levels, and health-related absenteeism from school can have a huge impact. People with a chronic medical condition can often be victims of bullying, especially in school. And this will also have an impact on their mental health. Overall, chronic illness will disrupt the child's life. I remember a patient who, as a child, developed psoriasis at a young age. And back in the day, it meant unpleasant, coal tar baths, which he despised. He hated the most. And often it led to fights with his parents, and his parents were very punitive, and then they wouldn't allow him out in the sun. He couldn't be out with his friends. So his whole life was contracted into this bathing in the home, and that was it. And of course, it affected his mental health. So sometimes it's the illness, but sometimes it can be the treatment and the response from the people around them as well.
Okay. So now for parents with children with chronic illnesses, right? Like what can they do to ensure that their child will lead a normal life, in order to not have all these mental health issues come up later in their lives?
Well, parenting a chronically ill child can be a real challenge, and it can cause immense stress, not just for the child, but for the parents themselves. And there can be, underlying guilt and sympathy, emotions that can affect the ability to parent supportively as well. In fact, it affects the whole family.
Yeah.
A few steps that parents need to take is first, educate themselves about their child's illness and get reliable and trustworthy information. Not some, old auntie's tale, do this or drink that or eat this. Discuss the illness with your child, depending on their level of development, how much they can actually appreciate. I think it's important to have a transparent, open discussion with your child and even with your siblings, and avoid hiding things, because all this can make them feel uncomfortable discussing it themselves as well. And help your child deal with feelings about their illness. Children don't just go through life without any stress. In fact, we know children and adolescents actually have the highest stress in any lifespan of individuals. And so we need to deal with that. We need to give them that opportunity to discuss these things. Don't just brush things off, but provide support, especially a listening ear and open communication. One of the things that children often report is they don't want to discuss these things because they fear their parents will get upset. Now, you've put a whole barrier for a child to be able to overcome their mental health related to their chronic illness, just because your reaction to what they say is different from what they expect. And I think finally, help your child lead a normal life, as normal as a life as possible. Give them responsibilities. Don't take away everything and say, look, to his brothers and sisters, you got to understand him. Don't let him wash the plates. You guys do that, and let him be spared. Give them responsibilities and maintain boundaries. They can't climb over you. And of course, let them enjoy life as much as other children their age do as well. Of course, with the protection and the advice from their doctors about managing their chronic illness as well.
But therein lies another problem, though, finding that balance, because some parents are overbearing, overprotective of their child because they have a long-term health condition which might lead to mental illness. And then there are some who go, oh, you'll grow out of it. Where's that fine middle point? How can you find that?
Well, the thing is, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to think that, we're the only ones involved in this. There are many parents out there who experience the same thing and the same illness and the same sort of condition. So I think parent support groups are really helpful. Doctors should actually discuss this with parents, where to find help for themselves first, find out information, and learn from others who have actually dealt with this. They may have grown up kids and been there before, and they can actually be a huge source of support for others.
How about for bullying? How about when a child has a chronic illness and he goes to school, for example? I've seen this case of this child having this very rare skin condition called the ichthyosis or something like that makes it like it's really tight. His skin is really tight, and he gets bullied in school a lot because nobody dares to go near him, thinking that it will contract, they will contract this disease. So how do you deal with bullying?
Well, I think it has to be the teachers and the people in the school who are involved in this as well. Just like the parents, they're the caregivers at home, and they want to have an open, transparent discussion and be honest with their children and the siblings. That has to happen even in school. So I think it'd be good for the class teacher to have that discussion, with the other students. And of course, it's not going to wipe out all bullying and everything else. So sometimes it's about also educating the child on how to help himself or herself deal with, people who have negative attitudes towards them. and build their own resilience as well.